Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. This week, we're talking about food allergy prevention. So, the Salk Institute for Biological Studies reached out to me with their recent research about potentially preventing food allergies. Now, curiosity kills the cat, right? I was curious. I was intrigued. So I spoke to one of the two researchers who conducted the study. And she said that what prompted her to do the study was their interest in how diet impacts health. She said, and I love that, she said, diet is our most intimate interaction with our environment.
It's delicious just how that all came together.
I know. So I was like, so true. I am with you. So here's the scoop. The study was led by two Stanford University scientists, published in Science Immunology in March. I think it was early March of 2026. So they were trying to determine, how does the body know whether to accept or reject a food? How does it know when to react or when to stay calm when we eat things? And then they wondered which specific foods are involved, and then which immune cells are doing this work. So this was a study on mice. They fed them this chow that was a mix of things. And then they looked inside the gut of the mice. And essentially, they found regulatory T cells, called Treg cells, that almost act so this is my version, they act like peacekeepers, right? They're like these peacekeeper immune cells. And they looked at what these little regulatory T cells were attaching to. And they saw that the cells were attaching to specific proteins called epitopes. So in the chow that had a mix of things, the epitopes were in corn, wheat, and soybeans. So all plant seed proteins. So they zeroed in on the corn specifically because it's not a huge allergy for people. And so it allowed them to see essentially what's the non-issue there, right? So they used this special little tiny tracking tool that could identify and follow only this immune cell to see how it responded to the corn protein. They looked at where the regulatory T cells live, how they perform in an inflamed environment versus a healthy environment. And they did this in both live mice and in cell culture models, so in a petri dish, to determine that the regulatory T cells are primarily located in the gut, and their activity varies based on whether they're in an inflamed environment or a healthy environment. And then they're either working to reduce the inflammation or sustain an absence of inflammation. So kind of making sense of this. Like I said, the proteins were found in corn, wheat, and soybeans. And they believe that this whole thing can inform future immunotherapies and maybe even prevent or treat allergies, food allergies specifically. So they say that maybe one day you could almost create a regulatory T cell that's pre-programmed to tolerate certain foods and then dampen that immune response to common allergens. And essentially, it gives us an idea of what's happening in those without food allergies. So what we now know is that not having an allergic reaction is an active process in the human body. And I think this is certainly interesting as far as medical or scientific application of research that may help a ton of people, especially kids. So according to their data, 6% of young adults and 3 to 4% of adults live with food allergies. And there's little to really in terms of treatment options to help those people manage this immune response. And if you have a child with food allergies or you have them yourself, it can be a lot. So interesting research, caveats that I think are worth throwing out there. It was on mice. not on humans. So we need more information and more research. And this wasn't a study on clinical application, right? So the researcher said to me that if you have kids, maybe it makes sense to have them eat some of the major allergens early so that we're helping the body's own immune system acclimate to these foods, so that like eggs, soy, wheat, peanuts. Certainly speak to an allergist, talk to an allergist. I think if you have allergies, like, you know, you have an allergist or someone on your care team or a physician, like ask them about this study, like bring it to them and say, hey, have you heard of this? They can certainly reach out to Salk. I think the other really interesting thing is that these findings are a change from the guidance that kind of dates back to even like the early 2000s. So it's a new conversation about preventing allergies that could be possible now because of this. So Brandy, thoughts?
I think this is really interesting, and I'm kind of excited to see how this develops, honestly, especially as someone who loves food. And I'm always sad when people have allergies to food. I'm like, oh no, you can't eat what? That's so sad. So yeah, this is kind of cool. I'm happy that they're looking deeper into this, and yeah, curious to see where we end up.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And they call it, by the way, the scientific term is sort of like oral tolerance.
Okay.
You know, that we're eating things and some people have an oral tolerance to foods that some people don't. I think it's super cool to just recognize that no reaction is an active process in the body too. Like it just reminds me, like everything about the human body is an absolute miracle.
Agreed.
Well, there you have it. That's the latest from the Salk Institute on food allergy prevention. Well, as always, everybody, I'm Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on all social media. I'm at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform. Send a message. I love hearing from you. Brandy, thank you for being here this week.
Thanks for having me. This is always fun to be here with you talking wellness. So thanks for the invite.
Yes, I appreciate you. And of course, friends, if you are not already a member, I invite you to the Happy Healthy Hub. You'll go to asaladwithasideofries.com/membership. This shows the support for this podcast, this community, and most of all, your health. On top of access to the community board where we can interact, ask and answer questions, and so much more, you get discounts, curated content, and of course, this week's recipe for the citrus poached salmon with asparagus. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform, share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it and you are worth it. Happy healthy.